This was the moment a climber completely lost control while descending Mount Risi. On a steep, snow-covered slope, he slipped, dropped his ice axe, and instantly lost his only way of stopping himself. Within seconds, he was tumbling head over heels down a roughly 45-degree incline, sliding and cartwheeling for nearly 600 meters while another climber's headcam captured the entire thing. But miraculously, after the uncontrolled slide finally stopped, he was somehow still conscious. He survived with only bruises and minor pain in his finger, and after being checked by a doctor in the group, he was able to stand up and walk down the mountain himself. This was the horrifying moment an Instagram free climber was forced into a dangerous descent while scaling an electrical tower. With no harness, no clips, and nothing but a strong grip keeping him alive, he was already hundreds of feet above the ground when a massive swarm of bees suddenly surrounded him. As the bees began attacking, he couldn't panic or swat them away without risking his life. Every movement had to stay controlled, since one small shift of weight could have easily sent him falling straight down. But despite the chaos, he maintained his composure, descending level by level, until he finally reached a safe enough height to jump and escape the swarm. This photographer in the mountains of China noticed what looked like a strange shape hidden along the cliffs, so he slowly began zooming in 100x to figure out what he was actually looking at. As the image became clearer and clearer, he realized the shape wasn't a strange rock formation, but a perfectly camouflaged apex predator that had already been staring directly at him the entire time. Leopards have incredibly powerful eyesight and can detect tiny movements from hundreds of feet away, often spotting prey long before the prey has any idea they're being watched. Their camouflage allows them to blend almost seamlessly into rocky terrain, trees, and tall grass, while they silently stalk animals for extended periods without being noticed. Once close enough, they can explode into short, devastating bursts of speed and are strong enough to drag prey heavier than themselves into trees to keep it away from scavengers. This driver thought he was being egregiously cut off by a truck on the highway, only to realize seconds later that the truck driver had actually saved his life, preventing him from driving straight into a broken down car that he couldn't see from his own angle. He then gave the truck driver a few friendly honks to say thank you. This was the moment a zoo security guard risked his own life to save zoo visitors from a hippo. After the massive animal managed to climb part way out of its enclosure, the guard stepped directly in its path. Knowing hippos kill hundreds of people each year and can run up to 30 miles per hour, he responded by repeatedly bitch slapping the hippo until it finally backed down and returned to the water. This was the moment a man begged for his life after becoming trapped inside a white tiger enclosure at a zoo in New Delhi, India. After reportedly crossing a safety barrier and falling 18 feet into a moat surrounding the exhibit, 20-year-old Maksud backed himself against a wall as a massive white tiger named Vijay slowly approached him. Witnesses watched in horror as the terrified man put his hands together in a pleading gesture and begged to be spared while the tiger stood just inches away, appearing to contemplate what to do. For several minutes, the animal appeared strangely calm, while crowds of people screamed and threw rocks in a desperate attempt to distract it. But the commotion eventually agitated the tiger, which suddenly lunged at Maksud, grabbed him by the neck, and dragged him across the enclosure in front of horrified visitors. By the time zoo staff regained control of the situation, the 20-year-old man had already died from catastrophic neck injuries and suffocation. Vijay was not killed afterward, with zoo officials stating the tiger had simply acted on instinct after a person entered his enclosure. In 1974, a photographer was snapping photos of two amateur street mimes in Central Park. 35 years later, he discovered that one of them was actor Robin Williams before he became famous. A Reddit user from California was gaming in his room when a stray bullet went through his window and struck him in the head. But he was miraculously saved by his Razer headset, which prevented the bullet from piercing his skull. Diana Ross, who sang "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," lost her husband in a mountain climbing accident. In 1983, a man confessed to the murder of his wife after a female skull was found in a peat bog near his home. He was convicted of her 1961 murder solely based on this confession. But it turned out that the skull actually belonged to a woman who had died nearly 1800 years earlier. After this discovery, the man withdrew his confession but was convicted anyway. While filming the 1972 film Napoleon and Samantha, 9-year-old Jodie Foster was mauled by a substitute lion on set. The big cat picked Foster up, shook her around like a rag doll, and only released her when its trainer yelled, "Drop it." Foster later said she was in shock and thought it was an earthquake as she watched the rest of the crew run away. The same lion had nearly mauled Bob Denver while filming an episode of Gilligan's Island years earlier, and shouldn't have been anywhere near a film studio afterwards. Foster still has scars on her stomach and back from the incident and has suffered from severe ailurophobia ever since. Almost immediately after being liberated from concentration camps, an estimated 14,500 Holocaust survivors died from refeeding syndrome, since their bodies couldn't process normal food after such prolonged starvation. During the back surgery of a Hawaiian man in 2006, the surgeon couldn't find the 2 titanium rods that were supposed to be implanted into the man's spine, so he decided to improvise by implanting the shaft of a screwdriver instead. The screwdriver eventually snapped, and the man died 2 years later following 3 more corrective back surgeries. The patient's family was eventually awarded $5.6 million in a malpractice lawsuit. This was the moment an MMA fighter was forced to face off against an aggressive dog. When a large unleashed pit bull suddenly charges straight at him, he reacts quickly, putting the dog in a headlock while keeping its jaws away from his face and neck. He stays calm the entire time, controlling the dog's movement on the ground like he's in a match. Luckily, the dog had a weak ground game. A few seconds later, the owner finally shows up and manages to control his massive dog. The guy walks away completely unscathed, and it's pretty clear his wrestling background is the only reason this didn't end much worse. In 2024 in Minnesota, an 18-year-old driver reported that his Honda Pilot began accelerating on its own and wouldn't slow down, even when he used the brakes and emergency brake. The SUV reached speeds over 110 miles per hour and continued for over 20 minutes, crossing into North Dakota while the driver remained on the phone with 911. As he was approaching a dead end, authorities coordinated a controlled intervention, using police vehicles to safely bring the SUV to a stop without a high-speed crash. Miraculously, the driver was not seriously injured, and the incident ended without any fatalities, though the cause of the malfunction has never been determined. In 2012, Harold Henthorne claimed that his wife Toni had died in a hiking accident after falling 140 feet off a cliff in Rocky Mountain National Park. On the day of their 12th wedding anniversary, Harold insisted on a strenuous hike up Deer Mountain despite Toni's bad knee and limited hiking experience. After her fall, he gave investigators multiple conflicting accounts, repeatedly changing what he said he was doing at the moment she fell over the edge. Investigators later found a map in his car with the exact location of her death marked with an X, and uncovered that his spouse before Toni had also died years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Toni's death closely resembled the 1995 death of Lynn Henthorne, who was crushed beneath a Jeep on a remote Colorado road when it supposedly slipped off a jack. Harold claimed both deaths were merely accidents, but prosecutors argued the similarities were far too extreme to be considered coincidence. In 2015, he was convicted of murdering Toni Henthorne and sentenced to life in prison. This was the moment when a Brazilian news reporter made the most horrific discovery of his life. While reporting on the disappearance of a 13-year-old girl who had recently drowned in Brazil's Miarim River, journalist Lenildo Frazão wanted to show viewers how quickly the riverbed drops off. As the cameras rolled, he jolted in shock and said he'd felt something like an arm brush against his leg. Hours later, rescue teams recovered the girl's body in that exact spot, confirming that Frazão had unknowingly stepped on her remains during the broadcast. The girl, named Raissa, had drowned after being pulled under by the river's hidden holes and strong current, and the journalist says he's now traumatized for life. This video shows a man holding his cat when he unknowingly steps on one of the deadliest animals on Earth, the eastern brown snake, the second most venomous snake in Australia, somehow slithering across his living room floor. Eastern brown snakes are so fast and defensive that a single bite can kill an adult man in minutes, causing paralysis, seizures, and cardiac collapse before help can arrive. The man is extremely lucky he stepped near the snake's head and pinned its movement, completely unaware until after watching the footage that he was only inches away from a strike that could have easily ended both his life and his cat's. On December 11, 2002, 22-year-old Alan Menzies murdered his best friend, 21-year-old Thomas McKendrick, inside his home in West Lothian, Scotland. Menzies had become obsessed with the film Queen of the Damned, watching it more than 100 times, and later told police he believed the character Queen Akasha was visiting him and instructing him to kill for immortality. When McKendrick came over that morning, Menzies attacked him with knives and a hammer, claiming the violence was triggered after McKendrick insulted Akasha. After killing him, Menzies drank McKendrick's blood and ate part of his head, stating this was the necessary process to become a vampire. He then placed the body of his best friend in a wheelbarrow and buried it in a shallow grave, where it remained undiscovered for the next 6 weeks. In court, prosecutors revealed Menzies had a long history of serious violence starting at age 14, including multiple stabbings. He literally told the court, "If you don't murder somebody, you can't become a vampire." Menzies received a life sentence with at least 18 years before parole eligibility, but in 2004, less than 2 years after the murder, he was found dead in his prison cell. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of two of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. In 2023, British TV presenter Holly Willoughby narrowly escaped a fate straight out of a nightmare. Her stalker, 36-year-old security guard Gavin Plum, had been secretly building what prosecutors called a murder kit in his Essex home. Ropes, metal cable ties, chloroform, and knives, all carefully organized for a late-night abduction. He spent over 18 months plotting every step, obsessively saving thousands of images of Willoughby, including hundreds of deepfakes he made to fuel his fantasies. Plum shared his entire plan with someone he met on a dark chat room called Abduct Lovers, where over 100 members spent hours trading violent fantasies. He even sent voice memos describing how they'd hit at night when traffic was low, and how he'd chloroform both of them, referring to Willoughby and her husband. But what he didn't know was that his online partner wasn't a killer, he was an undercover US federal agent. When British police stormed Plum's apartment, they found his computer filled with explicit material, detailed kidnap instructions, and surveillance notes about Willoughby's security routines. He knew her full schedule and had even written down what time she usually woke up. In July of 2024, Plum was sentenced to life in prison with at least 16 years before parole. This woman's crimes were so horrific that she became the first female in the history of France to receive a full life sentence. In 2022, 12-year-old Lola Davier disappeared after school in Paris, and security footage from the apartment building where she lived with her family showed her walking inside with 27-year-old Dabia Ben-Kirid following closely behind. Hours later, Lola's body was found stuffed inside a plastic storage box in the lobby of that same building. Investigators say Ben-Kirid lured the girl into her own sister's apartment, who lived upstairs, where she forced Lola to shower, taped her face, stabbed her repeatedly, and subjected her to what the judge called true torture, ultimately killing her through asphyxiation before eventually decapitating her. Ben-Kirid initially confessed, then kept changing her story, and even showed complete indifference when confronted with photos of the gruesome crime. In 2025, she became the first woman in French history to receive a whole life sentence, a punishment previously reserved for only 4 men. The tragedy deepened when Lola's father died in 2024 from alcohol-related complications brought on by the grief of losing his daughter. In 1978, 15-year-old Mary Vincent was hitchhiking through California when 51-year-old Lawrence Singleton offered her a ride, a decision that would lead to one of the most horrific crimes in modern history. After gaining her trust, Singleton bound her with rope, brutally sexually assaulted her for several hours, and hacked off both of her arms with a hatchet before throwing her off a 30-foot cliff to die. But Mary somehow found the strength to try and survive. Naked, pouring blood, and mutilated, she packed mud into her wounds to slow the bleeding, then crawled up the steep mountain and walked for miles down a deserted road, leaving a trail of blood behind her. The first car that saw her sped away in shock, but a honeymooning couple eventually stopped and saved her life, wrapping her in towels and racing her to help. While barely clinging to consciousness, Mary gave police a description so accurate that it led to Singleton's arrest within days. But despite the unimaginable brutality of his crime, Singleton served only 8 years before being released on good behavior. And just over a decade later, he struck again just like Mary said he would. In 1997, police found the body of 31-year-old mother of 3 Roxanne Hayes inside his home, stabbed multiple times and left in a pool of blood, murdered after he lured her inside under false pretenses. Singleton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death, but died of cancer in prison in 2001 while awaiting execution. Mary survived, learned to live with prosthetic arms, and became an artist and advocate for victims' rights. During British rule in India, one of the most horrific execution methods was blowing from a gun, tying a prisoner directly to the muzzle of a cannon and firing it straight into their body. Contemporary accounts from the 1800s describe bodies being torn apart instantly, with the head launched dozens of feet into the air and limbs flung in different directions. The technique was used most famously after the 1857 rebellion, and some museums in Pakistan and India still display wax reenactments of the horrific practice. It remains one of the most brutal documented execution methods in colonial history. After investigators tied multiple typhoid fever outbreaks to American cook Mary Mallon in 1907, doctors told her she was an asymptomatic carrier and banned her from cooking. But she refused to believe it, kept taking kitchen jobs under the same name, and new clusters of the disease kept appearing. When officials caught her doing it again in 1915, they sent her to North Brother Island, where she was detained for the rest of her life. Mary spent her final 23 years quarantined there, ultimately linked to more than 50 confirmed infections, earning her the nickname Typhoid Mary. Kyle Marissa Roth blew up on TikTok for fearlessly exposing celebrity scandals using follower-submitted blind items. Despite her bold personality online, she was quietly battling serious health issues behind the scenes, reportedly suffering from chronic pain and illness that she never fully shared with her audience. But instead of letting it break her, she used it as fuel. Roth said that seeing other chronically ill people push through their struggles inspired her to keep making content. However, in April of 2024, she was suddenly found dead at just 36 years old, leaving millions of followers stunned and searching for answers. Even stranger, just days before she died, Roth had posted videos saying she was going through something but would explain soon. Her cause of death still hasn't publicly been released, but her family has asked for privacy and insisted that she was deeply loved. The woman who spent her life revealing secrets left the world with one of her own, but fans remember her not just for the drama she uncovered, but also for her humor, bravery, and the way she made people feel seen and entertained during their darkest days. This was the moment when a typical news broadcast turned into an outright nightmare for CBS reporter Lara Logan. On the night of February 11, 2011, as Egypt erupted in celebration over the resignation of their president, Lara Logan was in Cairo documenting the historic moment with her CBS crew for more than an hour, until their camera battery suddenly died and they stopped to regroup. Her local translator then heard the crowd say things like, "Let's take her pants off," and a night of celebration quickly turned into pure terror for the journalist. Suddenly separated from her bodyguards and translators, Logan was swallowed by a crowd of 200 to 300 men who suddenly turned on her in a violent sexual assault. Her clothes were torn, she was dragged, beaten, and by her account, raped with their hands while others filmed on cell phones. She struggled to breathe as her ribcage was compressed and her limbs went numb, convinced she was gonna die. After about 30 minutes, a group of Egyptian women and 24 soldiers forced their way into the mob and carried her away. Logan was hospitalized, flown home the next day, and later went public to break the silence about mass sexual assaults in protest crowds and the risks constantly faced by women in volatile environments of men. In one of the dumbest crimes in history, an Arizona man who worked for UPS stole a diamond worth $160,000, then traded it for some weed. Instead of selling it or hiding it, he handed the massive gemstone to his dealer for a $20 bag of marijuana. The dealer, shocked by how valuable it looked, brought it to a jewelry store to get it appraised, and the person behind the counter instantly recognized it as stolen. Police were called, and within days, both the thief and the dealer were arrested. In the end, the man didn't just waste a life-changing fortune, he basically turned himself in for the price of a dub. On the other hand, in 1968 Japan, a man pulled off one of the most brilliant heists in history without the use of a single weapon. Disguised as a motorcycle cop, he pulled over a bank vehicle carrying over $10 million in cash and claimed it was rigged to explode. To make it believable, he lit a flare underneath the car and yelled for the employees to run. They bolted in fear as he calmly got in, drove off with all the cash, and vanished. Despite the largest manhunt Japan had ever seen, interviewing over 100,000 people, neither the thief nor the money has ever been found. In 1993, 16-year-old Marie Robard seemed like the perfect student, quiet, polite, straight A's, and deeply trusted by her single father, Stephen. They lived alone together, and friends said she appeared mature and responsible, even helping to care for him. But beneath the surface, Marie was quietly angry about one thing, a custody ruling that forced her to live with her dad instead of her mother. She grew more distant over time, secretly obsessing over how to change her situation. Then one night, her father suddenly collapsed in excruciating pain and died died just hours later. Doctors believed it was a heart attack, and Marie played the role of a heartbroken daughter so well that nobody suspected a thing. Life moved on. Over a year passed before a friend came forward with a chilling confession. Marie had stolen barium acetate from her school's chemistry lab and mixed it into her dad's refried beans, calmly poisoning him just so she could live somewhere else. Investigators exhumed the body, confirmed the toxin, and charged her with murder. She was charged as an adult, convicted, and sentenced to 28 years in prison. But in a shocking twist, the honors student killer was paroled after just 7 years, walking free before she even turned 30. She was so terrifying that even cartel assassins refused to say her name out loud. Melissa La Diabla Calderon became one of the most feared women in cartel history because her crimes went far beyond gunshots and executions. Working with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, she targeted the most vulnerable, migrants, pregnant women, and the homeless, luring them with promises of safety or work before trapping them inside of makeshift clinics. Investigators say she performed crude C-sections to steal newborns for black market adoption, while the mothers were left to bleed out on the table. In other cases, victims were cut open and stripped of their organs, their bodies dumped or incinerated before corrupt medical contacts funneled their organs to wealthy buyers. Witnesses reported hearing screams through the walls at night, and bodies were found mutilated or missing several organs. Even hardened cartel enforcers were terrified of La Diabla, calling her the devil in human skin. When she was finally arrested, authorities believed dozens, maybe hundreds of her victims would never be found.